Hi friends! Welcome back to my channel. A few weeks ago, I was caught off guard when I realized that I was experiencing the Sunday Scaries. And in today's video, I'm going to talk about how I dealt with it. And while I do that, I'm going to update a few things in my health journal and show you how I like to recap my end of the month now that we are in March. And I'm also going to continue chipping away at my pen log, which I started a few videos ago and I haven't really had time to dedicate to continuing to work on it. So I thought now would be a good opportunity to pick it back up and continue chipping away at it. So I invite you to settle in with your journal or planner and a cozy beverage while we hang out and talk about that feeling in my stomach that brews over the weekend and gets progressively worse as we head into Sunday. And it's that anticipatory, anxious feeling that would just get worse and worse. And it's something that I used to feel quite regularly in some of my previous jobs. And it caught me off guard because when I was regularly experiencing the Sunday Scaries, it led to some pretty severe burnout that took me a really long time to overcome. And in some ways, I still feel like I'm working through some of my burnout from that period in my life. So it's a feeling that I hadn't experienced in a while, and because I started to feel them more recently, I take it seriously because I don't want to let it become a chronic stressor, especially because I know that it can lead to burnout. And it's a good reminder that even if I do everything I can to set up a really good self-care plan and have the best intentions, I can still find myself in this spot. And I think the theme of this year is acceptance, and that includes accepting that I might find myself in this spot again and taking the time to listen to the signs that something isn't working and use that as an opportunity to make some changes. I call it the Sunday Scaries because this was a feeling that was pretty tied to workplace stress, which meant Sunday night was kind of like an indicator that Monday was coming and it would be back to the office, and I felt a lot of stress and anxiety that was pretty specific to my work settings at the time. Another way to describe the Sunday Scaries could be anticipatory anxiety. And anticipatory anxiety can be defined as worry or apprehension about an upcoming event or situation. So in my case, going back to work on Monday, because of the possibility of a negative outcome, such as danger, misfortune, or adverse judgment by others. The worry or apprehension is often accompanied by somatic symptoms of tension. So some of the early indicators that I was experiencing the Sunday Scaries were physical for me. I noticed that I started to feel that really nervous feeling in my stomach, and it wouldn't be so bad on Friday night or Saturday morning, but as we went throughout the day and we started getting through the weekend, I noticed that that nervous feeling in my stomach was getting worse. Some other signs that I've learned to recognize when I'm experiencing this anticipatory anxiety or the Sunday Scaries are that I am having trouble sleeping. So that might include waking up a lot in the middle of the night, or having trouble falling asleep, or having trouble staying asleep once I fall asleep. Another indicator is when my eczema flares up. And so I noticed that ever since December, January, my skin was starting to break out a lot more often than I was comfortable with. And that's always been a really big indicator for me when my eczema goes crazy. Like sometimes it coincides with the changing of the seasons, or sometimes it's environmentally related, but more often than not, when I take the time to reflect on what's going on, I can usually tie my eczema flare-ups to stress. Some examples of behavioral signs that I'm not doing so well are social withdrawal. So when I start canceling plans and not making time to spend with friends and family, so I start pushing people away. Also avoidance. So I noticed that I was starting to avoid checking emails or messages, and that was extending to personal emails and personal text messages that I just stopped responding to. And I would start to see these big numbers of unread messages that I've been avoiding responding to. And then there's also general task avoidance that involves procrastinating from work or taking much longer to complete work-related tasks. So something that might take me an hour, all of a sudden I'm doing laundry before I get started on a task for work, or all of a sudden I'm abandoning my to-do list and focusing on like the big priorities of the day, but I'm generally avoiding all of the other items on my to-do list. So a lot of procrastination and avoidance I noticed, and if I start engaging in sort of unhealthy behaviors like lying on the couch all day on Saturday, binge watching movies or TV shows or YouTube, those are all indicators that there's something going on and I'm probably trying to avoid whatever is bothering me. There's also some emotional indicators or signs when I find myself more irritable than usual, when I start to feel really short-tempered and impatient. And this is something as well that my partner sometimes can recognize for me. So if I start picking a lot of fights or we start having a lot of miscommunications, he's usually the one that notices it first because we spend the most time together. The other thing that I want to add is part of the reason why I have to put so much of an emphasis on constantly managing stress is because it's actually harder for me. And it turns out that individuals with ADHD tend to be at an increased risk of experiencing stress, and that adults with ADHD tend to experience a higher level of actual stress or anticipated stress compared to adults without ADHD. And it can be more difficult for adults with ADHD to recover from stress. So part of the reason why I spend so much time reflecting and planning around how I'm going to overcome stress is because things like planning and organization and self-control, which are crucial components to managing stress, naturally conflict with some common ADHD traits that I struggle with, like impulsive behavior. So in other words, when someone with ADHD gets stressed out, their tendency to react impulsively toward that stress can actually work against solving it. So it's a very reactive cycle. And as an example, when I notice that I'm getting really stressed out, I might try to disconnect and look for a form of escape, which might mean that I end up spending hours and hours watching TV or reading a book or getting lost in some kind of activity. And it's not necessarily healthy because it might temporarily help me escape, but it's not allowing me to actually process whatever stress I'm feeling, which means as soon as the activity is done, I'm not less stressed out at all. It's just that I've delayed the stress that I'm feeling. So now that I am aware of some of the signs that indicate that I could be experiencing some anxiety and potentially heading towards burnout, so when I am trying to do some reflection and understand what I'm feeling and why it's happening, I find that this health and wellness journal is actually a really good place for me to start in terms of being able to figure out like what's going on. Some questions that I can ask myself are, when was the last time that I felt this way? As I reflect on the last time I felt that way, I can also ask myself questions like, well, what was similar or different to the last time I felt this way? And what were some of the things that were going on at that time that contributed to the Sunday Scaries. So some of the things that particularly triggered me were that I was taking on too many challenges at once. So I had started a new job, and I was getting to know the team, and I was also understanding the complexities of the company that I was working with. But at the same time, I was also doing school. So I was learning a lot of new things at school where there are parallels and there are some transferable skills, but it's a different space. And so there was a lot of context switching happening, and I was also volunteering at the same time. So there was an element of like overcommitment to too many things, which also meant that I didn't have a lot of time for self-care. Another question that I ask myself or I reflect on is, are my issues driven by my anxiety, my ADHD, or is it a combination of both? This can be really tricky to figure out. And in a situation like this, when I'm trying to figure out what is actually causing the Sunday Scaries, if I have access to a therapist, this is something that I would typically try to process and figure out with them. For example, I might discover that going back to school was the bigger trigger for my Sunday Scaries because a lot of the new unfamiliar things that were causing me stress had to do with learning how to study again and learning how to balance really inflexible timelines that often conflicted with work-related deadlines, which was my source of income. So having that sort of organizational challenge could be an example of like the ADHD coming out as the primary issue. Or I might discover that it's because maybe at work and school, I'm doing a lot of presentations, and public speaking is really difficult for me to do. So if it were, say, a constant demand on public speaking, which is an activity that tends to cause me a lot of anxiety, then that might be the primary driver of what my current issues are that are leading to my Sunday Scaries. So reflection is really important because understanding the source of my issue allows me to make better decisions on how I'm planning on overcoming them. What is going on in my life today that could be adding to this feeling? I know I have a tendency to overcommit myself, which very often leads to getting overwhelmed. This is a well-documented pattern in my life, and one that I probably will struggle with for the rest of my life because I love to do things. If anything, I feel like there's never enough time in the day to do all the things that I want. And then in addition to that, I struggle with perfectionism tendencies, which means I can take a lot longer to complete tasks than is sometimes healthy. So if I'm constantly switching between doing too many things and I don't have enough time in between them to recover from like all that energy that I'm spending on each of those tasks, then I can run on adrenaline for a little while, so I can sprint, but it's almost a given that I will reach a point of burnout. And when that happens, I won't be able to complete anything properly. Another thing that I like to reflect on is, since overcommitment is a common theme in my life and is usually one of the driving forces of my anxiety or my Sunday Scaries, I like to look at what among that list of commitments are within my control. So that could be like hobbies that I'm investing time in. It could be volunteering that I'm doing. And then what is not in control. So school is something that is kind of something that I'm in control of, and I can take a leave of absence. I can pause and take breaks from coursework, but it is something that I am paying for, and I don't really want to delay it. And then of course work and work commitments, those are things that are my source of income and they pay my bills. So it's not really realistic for me to just walk away from work. And something I wanted to share with you really quickly is at the end of each month, I've been finding it really helpful to do a recap. So I did one for January. So I'll show you like a before the pen view. So I'll reflect on my month and I'll write down everything that comes to mind that happened in the month. So plus would be like a positive thing, and a minus sign would be something that maybe wasn't ideal. So for me, I would put, for example, like a minus sign would have been, Sunday Scaries, but a plus sign might be I was able to use my health and wellness journal to recommit to my plan and work through that. So I can say that I have not felt the Sunday Scaries to that degree since that week and since I took action. So that is a definite win for me. After I finish writing out everything that comes to mind, I will choose 5 highlights or key accomplishments for that month that I really want to remember. And then here I will write down everyone that I connected with that month. Sometimes I get tunnel vision and I'll feel like I haven't seen anyone or done anything, and relationships are really important to me. So I always get a lot of joy filling this out and reminiscing on all the great conversations and connections that I had during the month. So that's my February recap. It's not that fancy, but I do find that it is really helpful to do. I used to use the blank page in the Hobonichi cousin to do something like this, but since my cousin has turned into purely functional and all my notes pages go towards taking notes, I think it makes more sense to have the recap in here, because this is where I'm tracking my health and wellness. It's also where I'm tracking my dates and the movies I'm watching and the TV shows and just all the fun things that go on in my life. Oh, another win that I'll definitely be adding to my recap is NaNoWriMo, because I'm still thrilled that I actually completed it compared to my attempt last year. And I just had the best time writing those letters and getting to know you. And most importantly, I can review my health and wellness journal. So I can look for patterns to get a sense of how I'm actually doing overall. And when I started looking through my journal, I can start to see patterns. Like in December, I can start to look for patterns in my sleep and my mood. You can see in December I was getting a pretty decent amount of sleep. The goal is always 8 or more hours of sleep, but 7 is pretty good for me. And my mood was generally pretty stable or positive. And then you start to see some pretty wild dips in sleep. And as we head into January, you can start to see that my sleep has really gone down, and you can see that my mood has started to stay neutral or fall. And as I'm looking through this, like I'm still exercising and I'm still journaling, but as we get further into January, I can see that my sleep is starting to not go so great. I can see that it's a string of cloudy days. I do always find that I struggle when I don't see the sun. My mood is starting to trend not so great. And then it was mid-February when I felt the Sunday Scaries to a point where I felt like I could no longer ignore it. So when I'm looking at this page, I'm noticing that I barely ran this week. So normally I do a long run, didn't do it. I'm starting to feel a lot of like aches and pains in my body. I had a random like ear ache that didn't turn into anything, but I don't get ear aches or ear infections often, so that was odd. And I've been having a lot of sleep interruptions the week before, so I had made quite a few notes of like broken, disrupted sleep, didn't wake up, like couldn't sleep until a certain time, had trouble staying asleep, that kind of thing. And made a couple notes about attempting some of those physio exercises that I have not done at all since leaving the physio's office months ago. I can see that I'm getting less exercise, my sleep is not great, I'm feeling sore, and I'm not getting quality sleep. I find that it is really helpful to track these things, because as I work to make changes, which I'll talk about in a bit, I can also start to track how I'm doing to make sure that I'm working towards reversing those things. Another reflection question that I find can be really helpful is, what did I do in the past to get through it? Or how did I get past it last time? And the reason why that is helpful is because as I reflect on what worked in the past, I can leverage those things and see if they could be useful for me to use this time around. Last time around, I sought a lot of therapy to really help me understand what was going on. I leaned a lot on my friends and family and really worked to reconnect with them. And I also let go of some of my obligations, even if that meant upsetting or disappointing others, because ultimately I knew that I had to take care of myself in order for me to be able to function in a way that I could still be a human. So when it comes to taking action, I have a lot of information about what could be driving my Sunday scaries. So we're seeing all these signs that physically I'm not doing so well. Like I mentioned, my skin's breaking out. There's something going on. I'm also taking a look at what obligations I have going on, and what I realized was I really had been putting too much pressure on myself to do too much. And I realized that it was primarily more of like an ADHD problem, in that I had just overcommitted and I was having trouble staying organized, and my executive dysfunction was rearing its ugly head and preventing me from being able to get everything done. And then as a result, I was letting go of a lot of things from my self-care plan just to make time for doing all of the things that I had already committed to and felt were a higher priority. And I talked about acceptance and commitment therapy as an approach that can be helpful for people struggling with ADHD, and I think that it can also be applied to this situation. First of all, acknowledging that people with ADHD tend to be at an increased risk for experiencing stress, I think is important to accept and acknowledge, because I could look at all of the things that I have committed to and fought against it and said, well, you know, other people can handle this amount of stuff and they can still function. Why can't you? But it's just harder for me. And it's better for me to reset my expectations and recognize that I am in this situation because I have reached a point where I have overcommitted than it is to try to stay the course and try to continue doing everything that I've committed to and then find myself eventually burning out. You know, kind of accepting those thoughts and feelings instead of trying to change or control them can actually have a positive impact on one's mental health. I can also clarify some of my personal values, and then I can create some committed actions or accommodations for myself to get me through this period and overcome the Sunday scaries, so that I kind of break that pattern and don't end up feeling worse as the weeks go on. So some of the things that I committed to were, I reviewed my current commitments and I took a really hard look at what I might be able to take off my plate to ease my workload. So my paid contracts took priority because they are a source of income for me. One of the commitments that I decided to drop for now, which was extremely difficult for me to do, was I paused my volunteer commitments because some of the work I'm doing with school is overlapping with the volunteer work that I was doing anyway. So I'm still able to contribute to that space, but the contribution is happening through my school and the practicum that I'm doing instead of through my volunteer organization. So that was really hard to do because I really love the volunteer organization that I work with, and they were so gracious and they were so kind that I actually changed my mind, and then I had to go back to them and say, no, actually, I do need to take this pause right now. So that was difficult for me. Another thing that I can do is I can create more certainty around what needs to be done so that I don't feel as overwhelmed by Sunday night. And while I have the best intentions with planning, I did notice that during that time that I was experiencing those Sunday scaries, I wasn't using my to-do list as frequently. And I think that just goes back to that avoidance piece where I was kind of living each day without much planning and reacting to like the biggest thing that had to be done for that day. But that was taking up a lot of energy for me, and it was just causing me a lot of stress because I find it more helpful to break down really large tasks into smaller tasks and then giving myself a little more clarity on what I need to do. And being able to plan on Friday night while things are still fresh in my mind allows me to disconnect from it over the weekend, so I don't really have to think about it until I open up my book on Monday morning. And then another thing that I did was I revisited my self-care plan and I reprioritized the tasks. Sometimes that can look like adding new things to my plan if I feel the need to. But in this case, it was more about seeing that declining pattern of engaging in the habits that I know are good for me and recommitting to them because I know that they will benefit me, but I do need to carve out time to do them. So you'll see in subsequent weeks, I started reprioritizing exercise again. I was kind of back up to my runs. I'm still working on incorporating strength. I started journaling more frequently. So even in the next week, I journaled every day, which is so good for my mental health. And I also could see a pattern as well that I wasn't really engaging or spending time with my family and friends. And so I started putting more of an effort into carving out time to see my friends and family in person, not just like a Zoom call. My partner and I planned some date nights, so I managed to add a few more to that list and just get out of the house. And I continued cooking healthy and comforting meals, including lunches that I could fall back on so that I felt like I was just taking better care of myself overall throughout the day. And then I just continued to track them in this journal. So I've been remarkably consistent in this journal since I started it back in December. I'm actually really pleased with how things have been going. And I can tell that ever since I started recommitting to my self-care plan and taking a few things off of my plate, I noticed that my sleep was getting a little bit better. My mood this week was not that great, but following week, things have started to improve, and I've noticed that I've started to stabilize because I really aim to be kind of stable with my mood. I don't necessarily aim to be like happy all the time because I think that's kind of unrealistic. I also don't want to be sad all the time. So to me, when I see this neutral state, that's actually a really good thing for me because it feels like I'm regulating myself and I'm doing okay. So that is all that I had planned to talk about today. If you're still here, thank you so much for sticking around until the end. And I'm curious, have you struggled with the Sunday Scaries before? And if so, what are some things that have helped you navigate them? And if you found any parts of this video helpful, I'd love to hear what stood out to you and what are some things that you think you could try to break that pattern of the Sunday Scaries moving forward. Otherwise, I wanted to say thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you so much, and I will see you soon in the next video. Bye!